The descendants of the French Huguenots that were living in America at the time of the Revolution were almost without exception staunch patriots. Among these, none took a firmer and nobler stand than George Duffield of Pennsylvania. His ancestors fled from France to England to escape religious persecution, and thence to Ireland, from which country his immediate parents emigrated to America and settled in Piqua, Pennsylvania. He was born October 7th, 1732, and received his education at Princeton College. Graduating in 1752, he studied theology in his native town under Dr. Robert Smith and was licensed to preach in 1756. He married the daughter of General Armstrong, and in 1761 was ordained and settled over the congregation at Carlisle. In the dispute that arose between the colonies and mother country, he took sides at once and fearlessly, and when in open conflict and a long and wasting war were seen to be inevitable, he preached rebellion as a duty, and declared that he had no doubt that God would carry them triumphantly through the struggle. Before his patriotic addresses and stirring eloquence, despondency gave way to hope, and the spirit of determined resistance was kindled in hearts that before thought only of submission. At this time he was sent in company with Reverend Charles Beatty on a missionary journey to the scattered settlements along the frontiers of Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. Returning from his arduous journey, he received a call to the Third Presbyterian Church of Philadelphia. The Colonial Congress was then in session in the city, and consequently the greatest excitement prevailed among the inhabitants. He immediately took a bold stand on the side of Congress, and denounced sternly and fearlessly the encroachments of the mother country. The people flocked to hear him, and he soon became an object of dread and hate to the Tories, who sought in every way to injure him. On one occasion, the congregation of the First Presbyterian Church invited him to preach in their large place of worship on Sunday evening, when the officers of the church, hearing of it, closed the doors, so that neither minister nor people could enter. The latter, however, determined not to be baffled, and prying open a window, lifted Mr. Duffield through it. They then unbolted the doors, and the eager crowd poured in and filled the edifice. The news soon spread that Mr. Duffield was addressing the people on the Sabbath evening. The king's magistrate, being applied to, hastened thither, and forcing his way through the crowd, interrupted the speaker and began to read the Riot Act. A military officer among the congregation, by the name of Knox, rose and sternly ordered the magistrate to stop. The latter replied that he would not, and again commenced reading. A second time the excited officer, in a voice of thunder, bade him hold his tongue, but the magistrate paid no attention to the order and went on with his reading. The officer was a powerful man, and seeing his orders so contemptuously disobeyed, cleared his way through the multitude, and seizing the astonished magistrate, bore him bodily along the crowded aisle, and thrusting him out of doors, bade him be gone. Astounded at this summary ejection, the discomfited minion of the king took himself off, and Mr. Duffield went on with his sermon. The next day, however, he was brought before the mayor's court and required to plead to the charge of aiding and abetting a riot, and given bail for his appearance for trial. He politely but firmly refused to do either, asserting his rights as a minister of Christ, and denying that there was any riot whatever except such as the king's magistrate himself had created. The mayor, a kind-hearted man, said if he took such a course, the court would be compelled to send him to prison, and urged him to get bail, saying he would take as such any of his numerous friends then in court. Mr. Duffield promptly but courteously declined. The mayor then offered to be bail himself. He thanked him for his kindness, and assured him he felt grateful for this exhibition of his goodwill, but declared that he considered it his sacred duty to assert the rights of a minister of Christ and a worshipping assembly that had been ruthlessly invaded by a king's magistrate. The mayor was in a quandary, for he knew that if he remanded him to prison there would be another kind of riot, one of which all the king's magistrates in the colony could not put down. He finally said he would postpone his decision for a few days, and in the meantime Mr. Duffield might return home. The news that the king's government was going to put Mr. Duffield, the patriot clergyman, in prison spread like wildfire, creating the most intense excitement. It flew on the wings of the wind over the country, and reaching the region where he had formerly lived, the volunteer forces there called the Paxton Boys, though 100 miles distant, met and passed a resolution that if the king's government dared to imprison Mr. Duffield, they would march arms in hand to Philadelphia and liberate him at the point of bayonet. The worthy mayor, however, seeing the serious course things were taking, never called him into court to receive judgment, and the affair was hushed up. The patriots of the first Congress flocked to his church, and John Adams and his compeers were often his hearers, for he preached as Jonas Clark had before preached at Lexington. When the enemy occupied Staten Island and the American forces were across the river on the Jersey shore, he repaired to camp to spend the Sabbath. Assembling a portion of the troops in an orchard, he climbed into the forks of a tree and commenced religious exercises. He gave out a hymn, and as the soldiers, like the troops of Cromwell at the Battle of Dunbar, uplifted to the tune of Bangor or some higher score, and rolled it strong and great against the sky, the British on the island heard the sound of the singing, and immediately directed some cannon to play on the orchard from whence it proceeded. Soon the heavy shot came crashing through the branches, or went singing overhead, arresting for a moment the voices that were uplifted in worship. Mr. Duffield, to avoid the danger and escape such rude interruption, proposed they should adjourn behind an adjacent hillock. They did so, and continued their worship whilst the iron storm hurtled harmlessly overhead. The deep thunder of the heavy cannon shaking the ground on which they stood, and the hissing shot filling the air with their mysterious sounds, were not calculated to lessen the eloquent patriot's fervor or quench the glowing zeal that inspired him. It was a strange, solemn scene, yet withal picturesque, which that group of soldiers presented, listening with upturned faces to the man of God as he urged them to fight manfully to the battles of the Lord, while the deep-voiced cannon uttered between each sentence their angry notes of defiance. Many incidents and details of this part of his life are lost forever, while others are but indistinctly and partially remembered, serving only to make us regret that a complete account of his career as one of the chaplains and patriotic clergy of the Revolution cannot be given. His zeal for his country, however, never abated, and his patriotic efforts never ceased till peace and liberty blessed the land. He was a man of great humor and exuberant spirits, yet withal deeply religious in his feelings and possessing an unwavering trust in the promises of God. Whether it was his suffering country or his suffering family that weighed on his heart, he turned with an undoubting faith to his heavenly Father, feeling that he would send help in his own good time. He did not escape the privations which all more or less suffered, and often his family were left without any apparent means of subsistence. On one occasion his son came to him on Saturday night and said they were nearly out of provisions, and unless some could be purchased early Monday morning, they would be entirely destitute. But he had not a cent in his pocket, and knew not where to apply for aid, for all around him were as destitute as himself. Instead, however, of allowing his mind to be distressed at the prospect before him, and diverted from the duties of the Sabbath, he dismissed the subject, saying, "My son, the Lord will provide." During the day a sealed letter was put in his hands, which, in accordance with a rule he invariably practiced, he did not open till Monday morning. On opening it the next day, he found it contained a sum of money sufficient to relieve all his present necessities. He never knew who sent it. The same grand, unwavering faith that God would finally make us victorious in our efforts to be free never forsook him through all the vicissitudes of his long and eventful struggle of the Revolution. Faith is never allowed a place in the philosophy of history when events are being traced to their causes or probable results, though from creation till now it has proved stronger than all physical force. But that it had something to do with the success of our revolution, none but a disbeliever in the Christian religion can doubt. With the return of peace, Mr. Duffield was again quietly settled over his congregation in Philadelphia, where he remained till his death in February 1790, in the 58th year of his age.